Today on Market Journal, rain, rain, go away. Cool temperatures and soggy fields have made this planting season one to remember. Learn if more favorable field conditions are in our future. As harvest for winter wheat begins, many producers are weighing their options for what to do next. We'll look at the benefits of winter wheat as a forage or as a grain. And Nebraska's agricultural legacy was built by the leaders of yesterday and today. If you or someone you know would be a good candidate for the Nebraska LEAD Program, hear what it takes to apply. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Glad you could spend a little bit of your day with us. We've got lots to get to in today's show, and we're even debuting a new segment later on as well, so stick around for that. Kicking things off, though, with an update on 2019 planting. And for those who are able to get into the fields, extra wet conditions have made checking the forecast for the next round of storms especially important this year. And the question many producers are asking, when will Mother Nature finally give us a break? The week of mostly dry weather following Mother's Day was a welcome sight for many Nebraska farmers who needed the time to get caught up with planting. However, senior ag meteorologist Bryce says current rainy conditions could hang around through the 1st of June.
The pattern that we were looking at for the end of the month of May and into June is still pretty much a repetitive one for more heavy rain across much of the Corn Belt, and along with that, temperatures that are still going to be on the cool side. So I think that we're going to still be facing, by and large, a real slow time of it, and along with that, continued flood threats in the river systems, just a very difficult spring.
Even before the most recent round of storms, the period of dry weather wasn't enough for many producers to get significant field work done. Earlier this month, Bryce posed the question on social media, asking his Twitter followers, how much of a drier spell is needed just to get the ground in good enough condition to support equipment for planting?
The sense that I get is that after these rain events, it takes at least 4 days of drier weather before the ground is even in shape to be able to support equipment. And we saw that during the mid-May time frame because following the Mother's Day Sunday, May 12th, we had a drier stretch of weather in the Monday, May 13th through much of the remaining week, Friday, May 17th time period. And that was beneficial, but there was not a lot of work done until about Thursday, May 16th, because it took 3 days of solid drying conditions before the ground was in shape and there was enough dry topsoil that machinery could move without a lot of worries about getting stuck. And so this is the type of very slow and very uneven scenario that we've had to deal with.
Adding to the frustration, during a time when soil temperatures should be warming up, they're continuing to lag behind.
We have a large, very powerful upper air trough of low pressure that is kind of a winter-type feature in the upper atmosphere that's going to be in effect over Nebraska through pretty much the remaining 10 days or so of the month of May. And because of that, it's going to keep things very much on the cool side. And you add to that wet soils. That's a combination that is going to keep that soil temperature pretty well held back, kind of at a minimum on warming until we finally start modifying the upper atmosphere to allow more sustained heating to take place.
Bryce also says a weak El Nino in the Pacific has helped to fuel this wet weather pattern, and we'll have more about what you can expect for the week ahead coming up during Al's forecast. And since the flooding started, Market Journal has been giving you information on how the spring flooding is impacting the state's cattle industry. Well, Nebraska Cattlemen is helping to ease that burden too. Cattle producers have until May 31st to submit applications for disaster relief assistance caused by the flooding. Membership in Nebraska Cattlemen is not required for an applicant to get help. Nebraska Cattlemen Executive Vice President Pete McClymont wants to make sure affected producers don't miss out.
We're going to stop taking donations at the end of May 31st, because we need to really start getting out and putting money in producers' hands. So as of today, we're almost just shy of $1.3 million. So we're really grateful for the benevolence of people all across the country, as well as Canada and Mexico, giving us money. It's been amazing, the outpouring of support. So for those that are interested, please go to the Nebraska Cattlemen website and put your application in, because we need people to apply. We want to help people, and that's got to start with people filling out that application.
Applications for assistance must be mailed to 4611 Cattle Drive in Lincoln, Nebraska 68521 is the zip, or you can scan the application and email it to disasterrelief@nebraskacattlemen.org. Information is right there on the screen. Time for markets now, and like many of you watching, this week's analyst has been monitoring the weather, current planting conditions, and news on the latest Market Facilitation Program payment. I was joined by Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman on Thursday morning.
The payment is not going to be tied to the bushel, and there has not been a dollar per bushel announcement for either corn or soybeans or wheat or anything. It is a per acre by county rate payment. And the important thing I think that we read in there is that it's attached to your aggregate plantings for 2019. So prevent plant acres, as we're reading it, would not qualify. That's the important thing, I think, as we read that. The market didn't have a strong conviction as of right now which way it wanted to react. But what I think this does, and again, it's early, is if you're in the Eastern Corn Belt or in South Dakota and there's a lot of acres to plant, you now have another option on what to do, where maybe the shine on prevent plant gets taken away, because you have a potential payment coming as long as you get something planted in 2019.
So Luke, the USDA is saying that this new round of payments is being designed to avoid skewing planting decisions. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes and no. What we saw yesterday from the private industry on the headlines was that we were going to see $2 a bushel on beans, 4 cents on corn. Those per bushel payments definitely would have skewed planting decisions. I can see that it would skew planting decisions a little bit, not necessarily between commodity, because we don't know that there's any difference between corn and soybeans, but between prevent plant, do I plant or do I not plant, I think this creates an incentive to make sure we get those acres planted.
What do you think the initial reaction from farmers is with this news?
Probably the same as our reaction, and that's a lot of questions. The details were pretty ambiguous in there. It sounds like the first round of payments comes late summer, once we know what the acreage totals are, by the middle of July, and then depending on market conditions, we could see a second and third payment later this year. So the USDA left themselves plenty of wiggle room, just based on the article that we read this morning.
So how is this round of aid different than last year's?
Well, last year's aid was tied to production. So if you were a producer that went 100% corn a year ago, you missed out on the $1.65 that the USDA ultimately paid out, and got your penny per bushel on corn. This year, it is reading that it is not tied to the commodity. It's more just on planted acreage, in your county. They also said that your planted acreage for the program purposes cannot exceed what you planted in 2018. So as I read that, there's going to be producers that maybe acquired some additional acres this year. Those acres are not going to qualify for the payment, as we read the information today.
And I wanted to talk about prevent planting. From what we know now, you have to plant something in order to get payments, these MFP payments. So what are your recommendations for someone who is thinking about prevent planting, especially in light of the MFP news?
It's so hard to say because we don't have a concrete dollar figure tied to what that program might look like. We do know that the USDA is allocating more money than they were a year ago in terms of billions of dollars for MFP 2.0. So you would maybe anticipate that there would be a similar amount of dollars available on a per acre basis. But as far as what that dollar figure is, you don't know. I think the third item in this equation, and probably more relevant as we think about the areas to the east that don't have acres planted or in South Dakota, they need corn prices probably in the 430, 450 would make that decision easy to forego prevent plant and make sure that they get corn planted. These higher prices have created that incentive to make sure that we get the acres seeded to corn if they can do that. So between the MFP 2.0 and prevent plant, I think that farmers are going to be inclined to make sure they get acres planted, especially with corn prices rising. I think they want to take advantage of that, and farmers are an ambitious group of people, and think that we could see prices continue to rise, so they don't want to miss out on that opportunity.
Okay, giving us lots of good advice so far. Major takeaway of what we need to be watching for over the next few weeks, couple months?
Well, I think weather is still in the driver's seat. We're going into a 3-day holiday weekend. The weather forecast Monday night is going to be huge. If it confirms that we stay wet, I think we'll be higher coming in Tuesday morning. What you're seeing is a lot of the strength is in 19 and 20 corn. As you look out to the 2020 crop, you'll notice that DEES 20 futures are roughly the same price as DEES 19. The market perceives the risk to be in the 19 crop. One thing we're doing with these higher prices is we are hurting demand. And longer term, that's going to keep a lid on things. So farmers should be looking at 2020 opportunities as well. There's some creative ways that you can hedge that risk, but don't forget about the 2020 opportunities for corn. Soybeans, they remain tough all the way around.
Thanks to Luke for stopping by. Time now for this week's trivia question, and maybe you're frying up some bacon right now because pork is on the menu for our question. More pork is eaten in the world than any other meat. So what percent of total meat consumed is pork? Is the answer 27%, 40%, 58%, or is it 74%? Make your selection, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. 3 years ago, Horsch took its first step into the central fill single disc seeder market with the launch of the Avatar SD in Europe. This year, they're bringing the Avatar SD 40 to the North American market. It's a 40-foot, 48-row single disc seeder with 10-inch spacing. Earlier this year, Horsch held several events marketing the launch of the seeder in Nebraska and the Great Plains. One of the first things that stands out about SD40 is its dual tanks, intended to provide flexibility in the products applied or seeded on the field. You can read more about the new seeder in the May Nebraska Farmer. And it's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, last week it was warm and sunny. This week we're seeing some clouds, we're seeing some rain. What's ahead for us as May winds down?
Well, Tori, you're absolutely correct. We went from very warm conditions the previous week to very cool conditions this week. Widespread precipitation across the state. The only really dry day, if you want to call it dry, across the state was Wednesday. Seen some pretty significant snowfall accumulations during the early part of the week across the Panhandle. The heaviest of it, of course, across the northern 1/3 of the Panhandle, where we had anywhere from 6 to 12 inches reported. Further east, heavy precipitation across much of the western 2/3 of the state, anywhere from 1 to upwards of 4 inches reported. In farther east, much lesser totals except for southeast Nebraska. And during this time period, we actually had at least 14 confirmed tornadoes. So it's been a very active week. Looks like it's going to continue through this weekend. So we look at the upper air model. Here we have this big upper air low that's going to swing down the western coast and then eventually bottom out in the southwest before ejecting energy out into our region. So we have a southwest flow aloft. We're starting to see surface development of the low pressure system in the Texas Panhandle. That's going to start to feed moisture toward the north, and that will intersect the high pressure system to our north. So we're going to get a line of thunderstorms developing from Texas all the way into Illinois, catching southeastern Nebraska. Tomorrow that low pressure comes a little bit closer. We start to see a wide string of low pressures forming along the front range of the Rocky Mountains. That gives us a deep fetch of moisture, and we see thunderstorms starting to break out in southern portions of Kansas. That will lift northward during the day. Particularly south central and southeast Nebraska are the best bets for heavy precipitation. And by Monday, this trough starts to eject out, and we see the low pressure out ahead of this trough, which will bring very significant moisture to much of the central United States. And be aware, in eastern Nebraska, there's a very strong possibility of some flooding, like rains with the heavy precipitation. And then by Tuesday, this trough starts to lift toward our east, should start to bring into the precipitation as a trailing low starts to move across south central Iowa from south central portions of Kansas, keeping the thunderstorm activity just to our southeast, maybe clipping southeast Nebraska. Then on Wednesday, we finally start to see a drying pattern temporarily as high pressure stays in control of the central plains. We do see low pressure to our south, but most of the activity with this associated low pressure system will drive this moisture well to our east and intersect the frontal boundary that just passed us. By Thursday, we start to see the semblance of a little troughing action in the mid layers of the atmosphere starting to push low pressure toward our region. At the surface, we'll see low pressure developing the Texas Panhandle. So we have this fetch of moisture coming north, high pressure to our south. Slight convergence zone here across south central southeast Nebraska, but the real thunderstorm activity will remain to our south. And by Friday, we start to see this trough deepening, and that will once again start to eject low pressure systems out into the southern plains. So we see low pressure developing in the Texas Panhandle. That moisture will start streaming northward, and we will start to see this progressively move northward as the day moves on. So another round of severe weather is very possible. 8 to 14-day forecast keeps the cold conditions in place with that trough and the active pattern in the west. And in terms of precipitation with that trough, we eject out a lot of moisture into our region. So Troy, it looks like this active pattern is going to continue at least for the next 7 to 10 days. Potentially, there is some breaks showing in the models as we get into the second week of June, but that's a long way out from now.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, what % of total meat consumed is pork? The answer is 40%, and no surprise here, China is the country that eats the most of it. Next up, as I mentioned to open the show, we're introducing a new segment this week. Market Journal's Bill Dodd is here with a roundup of some of the top stories that he's watching this week. Bill, what have you got for us today?
We all know Nebraska is a top contender when it comes to corn and beef, but this year, however, has been an interesting one for wheat and what to expect from the crop. With unseasonably low temperatures to begin the month of May, some wheat producers have had concern over potential freeze injury to their crop. As of April 28th, the National Agricultural Statistics Service reported the conditions of Nebraska's winter wheat crop to be 3% excellent, 65% good, 28% fair, 3% poor, and 1% very poor. Extension educator Karen DeBoer tells us that, through experience, we know that injury does not always occur at the air temperature listed. Injury is greatly influenced by duration of low temperature and growth stages of the wheat. Furthermore, she explains the best ways to assess any damage sustained by freezing, as well as the microclimate factors that could affect your crop.
You need to wait at least 5 days for any symptoms to show up after you have a freeze. And we're talking about, like this time, if it gets down to about 28 degrees for a couple hours overnight, it can damage the wheat. And you need to look for nodes that are discolored as the wheat develops, depending on what stage it was when the freeze occurred. As it develops, that growing point or the head that comes out of the plant will show some damage. It may eventually turn white, or depending on when the freeze occurred, the wheat itself could be sterile because it was flowering at the time of the freeze. So those are some things that you can look for. And when you're talking about freeze injury, there's a lot of things that can influence whether or not the crop is damaged. One of them has to do with the amount of soil moisture that's present. If you have drier soils, they tend to warm up and cool down faster than wetter soils. So if your soil conditions are dry, the chances of injuring the wheat are a little bit greater than they are if it's wet. So that'd be one example of a microclimate.
If the wheat is flowering or just past the flowering stage when frost hits, wheat damage is not easily identified. The exposed anthers are the most susceptible to the freeze. In general, it's only possible to evaluate seed fill by dissecting heads 10 to 14 days after a frost. If there are many blank glooms or kernels are not developing, this is usually a good indication of damage. And with a possible downturn in the winter wheat market and hay shortage in several parts of Nebraska, now could be a good time for producers to evaluate whether or not they would be better off selling their wheat as forage or grain. Current market value of hay is ranging from $80 to $150 per ton. In some parts of the state, hay is in short supply. Harvested feed costs at current hay prices are ranging from $1.50 to $2.25 per cow-calf pair per day. 1 acre of wheat in May and early June with adequate moisture could provide 45 days or more of grazing for 1 cow-calf pair. At $2 per day, this is a value of $90 per acre. For some producers, the option to graze out wheat may net more value to them per acre than harvesting it for grain. Now, this is especially true if recent weather conditions or disease have damaged wheat and will reduce expected grain yields. As Nebraska Extension educator Aaron Berger explains, there are a few things that wheat producers should take into account first.
So obviously it just depends on what the forage situation you have in terms of quality or grain. So, really the cost of hay right now, if we were to feed a cow-calf pair similar quality hay, we're going to be spending around over $2, $2.50 a day. So when we look at the value of that grazing versus the alternative of feeding them a similar quality hay, it starts to become a situation where that wheat does have significant value for grazing. So I think we need to first evaluate what would be the impact of that decision in terms of impact on insurance. So I really encourage producers who are considering either grazing their wheat, grazing it out versus taking it to grain, or putting it up for hay or silage, to go visit with their crop insurance agent first, understanding what would be the impact to them of that decision. Really then it starts to come down to a partial budget, looking at what's the value of either grazing that or harvesting it for forage versus what they think they would net with taking it to grain. So we need to think about the whole system, need to think about the implications of either grazing or harvesting as forage, also in their crop rotation, and really put together what their options are so they can evaluate that and make the best decision. So for folks that have cattle in a dry lot scenario right now, muddy conditions are going to be the day, and so that's the situation they have. If they have the opportunity to get those cattle out on some wheat pasture, get those cattle spread out, get them in a clean, drier environment than they are currently, and also having those cattle graze a high quality forage, it can be a win-win in a number of scenarios. The other thing I see is we're tending to see a delay in terms of pasture green up, in terms of pasture growth being ready for grazing. And so being able to delay turnout is going to allow that pasture to get some additional growth on it before we go to grazing, which will benefit the overall productivity of that pasture for the season as a whole.
For young growing cattle, wheat hay should be cut in the boot stage or as soon as possible after heading to ensure good protein and energy content as well as palatability. If mature dry beef cows are to be fed, harvest can be delayed a little longer to increase yield, but nutritional value and palatability will be sacrificed. One possible advantage to grazing wheat or harvesting it early in the boot stage for hay could also open up a window of opportunity to plant a summer annual forage in the wheat stubble as a second crop if moisture conditions are present. And Troy, that's what I'm watching this week, and I'll send it back to you.
Thanks for that, Bill. Really helpful information. Finally today, for almost 40 years, the Nebraska LEAD Program has been helping those involved in agriculture broaden their knowledge and ag experience. Now, if you'll remember, back in October, we introduced you to a collection of agricultural professionals making up LEAD 38. Now, Class LEAD 39 is accepting applications. I spoke with the program's director, Dr. Terry Haney, to hear about some exciting things coming down the pipeline.
Well, the Nebraska LEAD Program is Nebraska's premier adult ag leadership program. We've been around since 1981, and we're all about preparing and developing and motivating the future leaders for Nebraska agriculture.
And big reason you're here today, get the word out about the deadline for new applications. This is going to be LEAD 39. So describe the type of person who is a good fit for LEAD 39.
Well, Troy, we're looking for men and women, generally between the ages of 25 and 50. Farmers, ranchers, those in agribusinesses, those businesses that support production agriculture, they're going to need to be committed to this program because it is a 2-year program. They're going to spend about 60 to 65 days away from that farm, ranch, or business. And so we're looking for those people that are, ready to take that first step towards their personal and professional development.
And deadline for LEAD 39, June 15th. How does somebody need to apply? What do they need to do?
Well, the first thing they need to do is give us a call, contact our office, our number 402-472-6810. Any questions they have, we'll answer them. Chances are they know someone in their community that's been through the program. That's a great resource right there. But request that application packet from us. It's not a lengthy application, but there are some open-ended questions they'll want to spend a little time on.
And you can also nominate somebody for the program too, right?
Well, that's exactly right, and that's what I hope your viewers do, because we wouldn't be in the places we are if someone hadn't nudged us or pushed us a little bit. And so we welcome those nominations for LEAD Group 39 or even into the future.
All right, and I've talked to you before about the program. You've told me LEAD graduates, they've gone on to do some pretty amazing things. Talk to us about that.
Well, you know, if you pick out one or two people, it makes them happy and a lot of people upset. But, you know, it's interesting. Last month, LEAD 37 graduated from the program here on East Campus, and our keynote speaker at their banquet was Paul Kenny. And Paul is a Regent, University of Nebraska Regent, and Paul was a member of LEAD Class 9. So there's an example of a LEAD fellow that has parlayed his LEAD experience into another leadership position. So, you know, we're very proud of Paul and the work that he's doing on the Board of Regents.
And LEAD 37, they had their international trip too. What was that about? What was going on there?
Their seminar, we traveled to Northern Europe, and so it was an interesting time. We went to the Netherlands, we went to Belgium, Germany, and Poland. It's interesting as they wrap their head around the common ag policy of the European Union, but the questions that those folks had for us and we had for them. Of course, we were asking them about Brexit. We're asking them about their common ag policy. They're asking us about our government shutdown and the wall. And so it was a lot of exchanges of thoughts and ideas and opinions, but it was really a once-in-a-lifetime adventure for this class.
And LEAD 38, that's been going on about, what, 7-8 months by this point. Any highlights from there you want to mention?
Well, you met them last September, and you know, we just finished up with them a couple weeks ago, and they're pretty excited for the next year. We'll give them some time off now. We'll meet with them about the third week in September up in Chadron State College. That's when we'll announce their destination for their international travel seminar. They're another great group, and I've really enjoyed working with them also. They're very dynamic. They're ready for an adventure. And so I'm looking forward to getting started with them in September, even though we're several months off.
And once again, that deadline for applications is June 15th. More information can be found online at lead.unl.edu. That's going to do it for this week's show. Next week, we'll tell you about a couple pests that you'll want to watch out for this growing season, and hear the plan Nebraska Extension has in place to help farmers who are just beginning the long road of flood recovery. All that and much, much more. Hope to see you right back here next time. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching, and I hope everyone has a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.